Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Hazel Birunji, and as we wait for more people to join, um, I can just tell the ones that are on the call that we have a simultaneous interpretation that is happening. So you just look for the global icon on your laptop or down at the screen, and you'll be able to see the interpretation that is available. In the meantime, we're going to give other people joining 2 to 3 minutes, and then we can officially start. Welcome, everyone. All right, all right, all right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're joining us from. Thank you once again for making the time to join us as we launch the third framing taxation. As we launched the third guide of the framing feminist taxation guide. My name is Hazel Birunji. I am a Ugandan feminist, and I will be moderating this session together with Nee. And we'll go right ahead. So before we start, just a quick reminder to everyone that is joining that we have simultaneous interpretation that is happening. So you just click the global icon just down on your laptop, and you'll be able to see the interpretations that are happening. So click on the channel and you'll be able to get that. So welcome once again, and I'd like to yield the floor to Maureen to start us off.
Thank you so much, Hazel. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us this wonderful day. It is truly a real pleasure to be here with you and to help kick off this important conversation. Before we move into the discussion, I'd like to briefly highlight Demand 3 of this year's 10th edition of the Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights, which is part of what we're amplifying today, public financing of care through progressive and redistributive taxation. Recognizing care as a human right requires more than good intentions. It requires resources. Governments and states must have fair and progressive tax systems that generate the public revenues needed to invest in universal care systems and in strong public services, rather than shifting the costs of care onto women's unpaid labor. This is also why today's moment is so important, as we are so pleased to mark the launch of the Framing the Feminist Taxation Guide, Volume 3. This guide takes a feminist, intersectional, and human rights-based look at tax policy and explores how fiscal systems shape care, gender equality, and economic justice, drawing on case studies from Argentina, Ecuador, Paraguay, the Philippines, and Senegal. I will not delve deeper into the guide, as I would not want to water down the remarks that will be made by Crystal and also the presentation that will be done by our speakers in a few minutes. So I will leave it at that, and I hope that you engage actively in today's webinar. I would like to acknowledge the incredible work of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, Tax and Gender Working Group, as well as the core team who have really supported the development of this publication. The core team members are actually the ones who are also running the show today, from our moderators to even our presenters, and a good number of them as well are supporting us behind the screen. So kudos to everyone for the excellent work done so far. We also extend our sincere appreciation to the NAWI AfriFem Collective for their generous financial support in making this work possible. It is therefore my great pleasure to invite Crystal Simeoni to deliver the official opening remarks. Crystal is a Pan-African feminist advocate and the director of the NAWI AfriFem Collective. Her work exists at the intersection of feminist political economy and community practice, bridging the gap between technical critique and radical imagination. Through the NAWI Collective, she analyzes and reimagines the macro-level structures that impact the African continent, centering the lived realities of African women in every narrative. By translating complex systems into the language of collective action, Crystal ensures her work remains above all else at the service of life. Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. What an honor to be here. What a privilege. Volume 3. It's been a long journey. I remember when we started at Volume 1. So it's been so wonderful to see this coming to fruition and to be where it is, especially now. Maureen, you talked about us not needing just good intentions, but resources. But right now, even the good intentions seem to be very scarce in this political space that we currently exist in. So I'm going to start off by saying that we find ourselves standing at that proverbial moment that Arundhati Roy so eloquently described, a portal between one world and the next. While she wrote this at the height of COVID, her words feel even more urgent today as the very foundations of multilateralism as we've known it have begun to fundamentally shift. It also feels as though we're living in the exact same crisis that Antonio Gramsci warned us about, where the old world seems to be dying and a new world is really struggling to be born. And in that in-between space is the time of monsters. And it's really giving monsters, as a young generation like to say. For decades, tax has been treated as a very sterile, very technical of an issue, but the tax justice movement has worked incredibly hard to pull back that curtain and show that fiscal policy is in fact a very deeply political choice about what and whom we value. However, we need to name an uncomfortable truth. And even as the tax justice movement has fought for political clarity, it has historically remained super androcentric and led by men who have frequently pushed feminist questions of analysis, of framing, and of alternatives to the extreme periphery. For the tax justice movement to be truly about universal justice, it is imperative that feminist political economy moves from being just a soft footnote being the very heart of the work. And this shift is why the work we're launching today is so very essential. Centering this analysis may be uncomfortable for those used to ignoring the invisibilized labor of women, but it is necessary to stop being the subjects of study and finally become the architects of our own collective liberation. The importance of this analysis lies in it being done not just on, but from the global majority, by documenting our own fiscal realities through case studies from Argentina, from Ecuador, from Paraguay, the Philippines, and Senegal. We engage in a radical political intervention that reclaims our agency. And while this volume groundbreakingly centers care, we at NAWI are also gently pushing to expand this lens to include the concept of social reproduction. We recognize that while care often focuses on direct interpersonal acts of nurturing, social reproduction encompasses the entire systemic process of reproducing life and of society. In the African context, the systemic process includes not only the labor of fetching water and collecting firewood, but also the very fundamental relationship to land. Land is not merely a productive asset, it's a site of social reproduction where food is grown and life is sustained. Yet in places like Senegal, women occupy 45.3% of informal jobs without legal protection or secure access to the resources they manage. And it is precisely this relationship between land, labor, and survival that proves our economies do not just have workers, they produce them through millions of hours of effort that traditional male-centric economics, even economic justice ones, treat as a given factor rather than an actual produced one. And so this volume provides data to show that these are not just soft issues, as we've been told so many times, but demonstrating that if unpaid care were a paid sector, it would account for 16.8% of GDP in Argentina and 22.4% in Paraguay. In Paraguay, women generate over 3/4 of this vital value, triple the contribution of men, yet remain the group most exposed to poverty. Argentinian women spend almost twice as much time as men on in-home care, regardless of their paid employment, providing this neutral tax system that relies on gendered exploitation. We see a violent double injustice where the poorest households in Argentina bear a 22.4% tax burden, while the richest pay a paltry 8.6%. This pattern is mirrored in Ecuador as well, where VAT participation is 26.9% for the poorest decile, but doesn't exceed 5% for the wealthiest. Taxing survival to protect elite wealth is really what it is. And because care is currently scattered across various ministries rather than being named and financed as a human right, its components are diffused and it becomes a first variable sacrificed at the altar of austerity. In Senegal, women should shoulder a significant tax burden through market and hygiene fees while receiving almost no social protection in return. And so we must address the struggle of women in Dakar who leave home at 4 a.m. to fetch goods because there's no public childcare, leaving them to choose between economic survival and family safety. We're demanding a shift from taxing to extract to taxing to care, requiring innovative measures such as a 5% wealth tax on multimillionaires or earmarking taxes on tobacco and luxury goods for the universal health coverage. As we stand at the portal that Arundhati Roy spoke about, we have a choice. Carry the baggage of the androcentric extractive economics or leave it behind for a system that recognizes there is no economy without the labor that sustains it. And so as I stop, I'd like to leave us with 3 questions that I hope will come up in today's conversation. 1, if we accept that care is a public good and an autonomous human right, are we prepared to legally and structurally recognize and reorganize our state apparatuses to guarantee it, or will we continue to treat it as a private burden for women to solve? Secondly, how can we call our tax systems just when they intentionally ignore the massive percentage of GDP produced through social reproduction in the global south, while at the very same time offering tax breaks to the capital that exploits it? Not to say I don't have deep issues with GDP as a measure, that's a whole other webinar, but it's a question I will pose. And lastly, as multilateralism shifts, especially now when, whatever is going on in the world is happening, will the tax justice movement continue to treat feminist political economy as a footnote, or are we ready to finally let women and gender diverse people from the global majority lead us through the portal towards a truly redistributive future? I'll pass on and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Indeed, your welcoming and opening remarks give us so much to think of and it gives a very good foregrounding to what the other panelists are going to talk about today. So, our first speaker is Noelia Mendez, feminist economics based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, with a degree in economics from the University of Buenos Aires, where she also pursued a master's in economics. Noelia serves as a co-chair of the Young Scholars Committee at IAFE and is part of the coordinating group of the Dawn Feminist Global South Feminist Perspectives on Macroeconomics project. She is also a fellow in Oxfam's Fellowship Initiative on Remaking Global Economic Thinking in a post-neoliberal era. Over to you, Noelia, and welcome.
Thank you, Hazel. I will speak in Spanish in case you want to go to the interpretation button and choose your preferred language. Voy a empezar con algunas.
So I'm going to start with some impressions to share today about the theoretical framework, because when we start thinking about this third guide in 2024, we started from a key question really, that what does income have to do, taxes have to do with care? And actually they're very much connected. For those who have been working on this, it's pretty obvious, but we realized that it wasn't that obvious really for everybody else, and particularly for those people working in taxes. So the taxes that I used to finance what's making possible for life in society, for example, services in health and education, long-term care for people with disability and the elderly. You can finance maternity leave, paternity leave, and ensure minimal income for those who need it the most. And also they can be used to build drinking water systems and basic infrastructure that without which survival is hard. But when we're going to see how these taxing systems are designed, we see that these taxing systems in the world are not working well. They are failing people living from our work, particularly women and diversities, and particularly those who live in the global south. While a ultra-rich minority, mostly men, that are leading extractive company and financial companies, take advantage of the globalization and the free flow of funds transnationally to concentrate more wealth, and they do it through complex strategies, accounting and financial strategies that are facilitated by multinational consulting firms such as KPMG, EY, and so on, to pay less taxes in the places where they create their fortunes, and they shift their profits and wealth to tax havens where they practically don't pay any taxes. And there, the result is pretty clear. The states are left without the necessary resources to ensure basic rights such as health, education, and social security, and the right to care that we now know it's an independent right. When the state leaves, the care needs to continue to happen, and it even increases because you have to sustain life still. And those sustaining life usually are women with more unpaid labor oriented to care. Uh, May that be in extreme cases such as looking for drinking water to drink and to cook, and looking for fuel to cook as well, or taking care of the youth of the children that are not going to class, and taking care of the elderly or sick people or people with disability that are not able to leave to access to the funds for other kinds of care or health. So here we propose to look at the taxing systems with the feminist lens and asking ourselves if taxes are reducing the gender bias, or are they actually widening them. If they are recognized is when they're collecting a tax and the contribution that the care economy is given, and if they are given enough to distribute this into care, or if that's being left to the households and particularly women, as was explained. So thinking about taxes is thinking about the collective sustainment of life in a more fair way and with the right of access to care, which is why we have been undertaking these studies. Me, myself, alongside Maria Julia Elioso, we address this Argentinian case, and we're going to be talking about that in a second. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much for the activity. Um, And so let's go a little deeper into the Argentinian case. So I wanted to highlight that this case is particularly relevant because the country for decades functions as a neoliberal politics laboratory. Every time we have a neoliberal government, we have the same recipe. We lower the taxes to the richest sectors. We deregulate the economy and the government gets smaller with the promise that that is going to bring investment and social prosperity. And honestly, the evidence shows the contrary. Um, it doesn't really improve well-being, but it actually worsens the economy of most, and particularly women's and biodiversities. In this study, we analyze with Maria Julia the fiscal financing of key policies for social organization of care in Argentina, which is social security, education, health, and basic infrastructure. And the conclusion was quite clear. It's not enough to consecrate rights in the law. For care policies to actually exist, we need enough fiscal resources that are enough, stable, and protected from the economic and political cycle, which is so volatile. When we analyze the social security system and social protection system that we have in Argentina, we show that it is not possible to ensure equal licenses to care and have minimal income for populations that are more dependent, the children, elderly, and disability people, and people who have economic vulnerability, if we only support in the contributions that registered workers do. And that is very evident in economies such as in Argentina and many others that are located or are placed in the guide. In Argentina, almost half the population is working in informality. In Argentina, there's an accelerated aging, which is happening globally, and we are all in a global context where um, economic growth is depending less and less in human work due to AI and the technology. So it is indispensable to have social security systems have uh, fiscal resources, and not just that are coming from indirect taxes such as the VAT. Uh, but we also need to have them have resources that tax wealth and profit, which nowadays doesn't exist in Argentina, particularly the extraordinary profits from those that are thriving and thriving particularly in context of multiple crises such as the ones we have. So another conclusion of our work is that it becomes urgent to protect the taxing systems that contribute to health and education from the voracity of accruers. So in the case of Argentina, we show that through the indebtedness, an important part of resources from the state was committed in paying the debt instead of financing basic public policies, since it was placed as a guarantee of the repayment directly from public revenue. And that way, education, health, and care are only left to a variable place in adjustment. Argentina is a particular case because it's able to have an important amount of revenue compared to the region. Almost a third of the product is revenue, and even compared to developed countries, but it is being done to a big dependence of regressive taxing such as the VAT, and to reduce the weight of those indirect taxes that apply obviously a further operational effort to those that have to pay it. It is important to strengthen direct taxes, which means to tax more to those who have more the wealthy, the great multinational corporations, and also those that have extraordinary profits developing extractive activities that put in risk life and environment, such as the concentrated agribusinesses, open cut mining and fracking. Facing those highly concentrated economic interests is not possible through isolated national fiscal policies, but with the cooperation or coordination in fiscal um, matters to limit evasion, illusion, and the profit shifting with actions that are strong, such as bringing the taxes to the multinational companies, to the ultra wealth that are ambitious and are able to generate significant flow of income to finance care public policies. And it also requires to improve transparency, traceability, and the fiscal information systems to know who are paying the taxes and who are not, and who are being benefited by the current fiscal order. These weaknesses shown by the Argentinian fiscal systems become critical in the current toxic context that we're living in the country with Javier Milei's government that is promoting the explicit policy of destruction of the state, and where the adjustment falls on those who have less. So as ensuring the care financing is not just a technical discussion, but a central political dispute. And when we wrote this study, and I think that is shared by the our colleagues in the guide, we want to build care societies for care for 99% of population, and not areas of sacrifice for the post accumulation for the accumulation of wealth of the 1%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Novella. That's a great one there. I want to introduce the second speaker for us. I mean, from the observation, you can see that we are unpacking, and there are quite a lot of things that we are learning from there. The second speaker, she's a researcher and advisor on economic justice with a background in law and public policy. She has worked on taxation, debt, illicit financial flows, reparation, and corporate accountability, among other issues with organizations, including Tax Justice Network Africa, Oxfam, and Amnesty International. She is interested in reimagining a more just world. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Riva Jalipa to take the floor. Thank you.
So I wanted to begin by sharing the conceptual framework that the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific has, because I think it's really useful to understand how policy interventions recognize how they need to address care. So you'll see they've defined care as unpaid care and paid care work. And that's hugely useful because we're looking to understand how can we recognize unpaid care work more. And it also recognizes that there are so many different moderating influences like households, like the country-specific context, and emerging socioeconomic issues. So, the socialization, for example, of gender norms plays a huge role in what happens in the Philippines, but also the economic context. I always tell people, when they ask me what's your biggest export, I say it's people, because almost 1 in 10 Filipinos leaves the country. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And so in terms of the different kinds of care policies, responses that we have, there's those related to care-related social protection, transfers and benefits, care services, and employment-related care services. And these all have the ability to impact whether the outcomes are really care responsive and gender transformative, or if they're just gender blind or gender sensitive. And all these are enabled by macroeconomic policies, social protection policies, labor policies, migration, and digital inclusion. And at least UNESCAP understands that the recognition of care has to be foundational to any responses related. So if we look at the unpaid care economy, unpaid care work to begin with, That contributes about 37% of GDP, so over a third. So that's huge. And women in particular spend up to 13 hours a day on unpaid care work, compared to only 8 hours for men. And in terms of girls, by the age of 15, they spend on average 9 hours relative to 4 hours for boys in housework. Having said that, the Philippines does rank well in terms of its initiatives to reduce the gender gap. So it's 17th globally. I think the only country in the top 20 in Asia that's really, really trying hard to address this. But still, female labor participation is still very low, almost less than half. It's at 47.6% relative to 74.8% for men. So there's still a lot of opportunity to improve on that. This is also largely affected by the rural-urban migration, but also migration externally. So 12% of all households have had an overseas foreign worker or have a overseas family. So my family, for example, is part of the statistics. And this is a huge contributor to GDP at 10%. So of all the 110 million or so Filipinos in the country, almost 2 million of them are abroad, and almost 200,000 of them work as domestic workers. So this means we're not only outsourcing care work to migrants, but it means we're also destroying the social fabric and the family fabric, which changes the way we're able to rely on kinship ties and communities around us to support care within the family. When we look at paid domestic work, so the protections for migrant labor workers in domestic work has at least now improved. So there is a minimum of wage of $400 a month. And this has had a great impact also in the local economy, so that at least in the National Capital Region, there is a minimum wage of $107 a month. But if you look at what this looks like, there's about 2.5 million domestic workers locally. Majority, 97% of them are female. They live in and they don't always get a day off. So despite the Domestic Workers Act, there's still a lot of protection that can be made and recognition of that work. But it's a progress in the making. So as Lane mentioned in the is a lot of healthcare spending now that when we look at paid care work is from out-of-pocket expenses. So this has a huge negative effect on the ability of your average person to just access healthcare. You have to make a lot of it out of your pocket. And then if you look at how much the government actually allocates to health expenditures, it's only 8.4% of its budget, which is below the recommended 15%. And a lot of it comes from a lot of health insurance. So when you talk about where's the money coming from,
I can't hear what she's saying. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I can't. She's breaking. No.
Is it better?
We hear you. Yes.
Is it better now? Okay, moving on.
Yes, it's better.
Wonderful.
Yes, it's better.
Wonderful. Moving on to education spending. We find again, while we're almost near the benchmark for health spending on education, it's still less than what is recommended in the Education 2030 Agenda, a framework for action. And we see that even if it is spending, we're spending less than we should. But the good thing, at least in terms of promoting equitable outcomes, we are spending more on pre-primary and primary over secondary and tertiary. So that's considered progressive. But one of the reasons why we're just not, I think it's not just about spending, but it's also the quality So we can be doing this, but a lot of assessments show that Filipinos are just not doing well in terms of their literacy and their dropouts. So also the quality of spending and the outcomes from that spending need to be improved on. When we look at social protection, we find that there's a lot that comes in. There's a lot of effort to try to promote equality through social protection programs, and the Philippines has done a lot in this respect. Its conditional cash transfer programs have the highest number of beneficiaries in the world at 20.2 million, and it covers at least 2/3 of its poor population, which is well above the global average of 42.8%. And that's 26.2% of the overall population. And when we look at where the money is coming from, we see that it's almost equal between corporate income tax and personal income tax, so on direct taxation. But there's also a significant proportion coming from indirect taxes and consumption taxes. So this has a regressive effect. And one of the contributing factors to this is we reduced the corporate tax rate from 30 to 25% in 2020 because we were trying to align with ASEAN tax harmonization. So some further research could be done in terms of seeing to what extent foregoing these revenues on corporates is having an effect on the ability to finance care. And then when we look at, okay, so what could be done in terms of financing, but what about spending? So at least we find that at least the biggest line item budget goes to social services. And if you look more granular at that, the majority goes to education and welfare. So at least in terms of relative amounts, there's an intention to spend more on social services. What I found interesting about looking at this study was that this phenomenon of overseas foreign workers presents a catch-22 situation because you're promoting vulnerability and intersectionality, but it provides revenue for the country. 10% of GDP comes from domestic, remittances. But again, like I said, it breaks the social fabric. And then another interesting find that I found was that we earmark revenues from sins like alcohol and tobacco, and that comprises almost half of healthcare spending. So I thought that was an interesting find and something that could be replicated and built on and continued. And then from an anecdotal personal experience as well as statistics, that one way that older persons and people with disabilities have benefited from progressive taxation is the VAT exemptions for them. So for basic goods and services, older persons and people with disabilities get exemption. So just to conclude in terms of recommendation, I mentioned there's this huge fragmentation in terms of health financing. There are too many sources, and it's not clear how they ensure that they benefit, in particular, the poor. Also, there's so many social protection programs, and it needs to also be clarified to what extent, again, they could be harmonized and made more coherent. I mentioned that I'm not sure that the cost-benefit analyses have been done around the revenues forgone as a result of reducing corporate income taxes. And finally, moving forward, studies have shown that there would be need to have a national care policy to promote equitable economic growth as well as poverty reduction. And we should look more into taxing wealth and inheritance. So thank you for my time.
Thank you so much, Riva. That's a wonderful presentation there. You took us on a high note, especially 37% of unpaid work to the GDP. That's a balloon. And I know there will be some commonalities as we unpack. And but may I remind our participants that if you have a question, kindly put them in the chat so that at least we can follow through when we open the portal for questions. Ezel, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we will then proceed to have another quiz because at the introduction at the start, I told the participants that throughout this webinar, we're going to have different quiz or mind teasers before the speakers present their findings from the studies that they conducted. So over to you. And our next speaker is Veronica Serafini, a feminist economist with a master's in social sciences, a PhD in economics. She currently works as the gender specialist at Latenderd, also a lecturer at the National University of Assumption, I hope I pronounced that right, and the Catholic University. Veronica is a researcher on labor markets, poverty and inequality, social protection policy, and financing for development with a gender perspective. She is currently focused on issues relating to fiscal policy from a feminist economics perspective, and in particular, financing opportunities for care policies in Latin America. Over to you, Veronica.
I am going to talk in Spanish if you want to speak.
So good morning from Paraguay. It's a pleasure to be here after a process that's been very interesting of discussion regarding taxing and care. And as Crystal and Noelia have mentioned in the beginning, before talking about the topics directly related to each country, I think that it's with
Hey, Veronica, sorry, I want to just stop you for a little bit. I think people so interpretation is available for everyone. So we have interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So just down on your laptop or phone, you'll be able to click the globe icon and click on any of the languages. So there's interpretation happening in English, French, and Spanish. So for non-Spanish speakers, for English speakers, then you get to click on the English channel so that you are able to listen to the interpretation. Yes. And if the global icon is not very clear, then you can click on more or the three dots, and you'll be able to see the globe icon with interpretation. Then you click on English, and then we'll be able to listen to Veronica's wonderful presentation. Back to you, Veronica, and sorry for the interruption.
Okay, as Crystal and Noelia said before, it's important to frame the debate of the financing of care policies in a theoretical framework and also to frame the fiscal debate in fiscal policy because there's very close connections to what Crystal and Noelia have already talked about. So, what is the connection between fiscal policy and social reproduction? That is why we need to discuss financing. In particular, financing of care. We shouldn't really care only about discussing those who are being reached by care policies and who are being benefited, how they're being distributed, if we can improve distribution of time between men and women. But basically, who finances those policies? In our countries, and I'm referring mainly to Latin America, our taxing systems are quite unfair. They are sustained by indirect taxes, and particularly taxes on consumption. And since we have low coverage of Social Security, there's also a lower contribution from the employer or the boss in some cases, which is the contribution of capital. So in unfair taxing systems and with low coverage of Social Security, the capital is contributing very little. And it ends up receiving contributions of the workers to the fiscal system and from women because they consume and end up paying taxes indirectly, such as those to consumption, which is why it is important to think about beyond the amounts that are being financed, who are financing, who are paying those taxes and those contributions. And we also spoke about an important thing today here in Latin America and the world, which is the great weight of the debt. Because we not only need to think that all of the taxes that are being collected are going to be to care policies. On the contrary, at this point in economy history, a great part of what is being collected or the taxing reforms that are being thought about are oriented to pay the debt and not care policies. And since we don't have care financing, the debt also falls, the consequences of the debt fall on women because austerity that comes from the fiscal restrictions are assumed by women with more work that is not paid and more care work. And there's also an indebtedness of homes to finance basic services such as care. So there's a circle in which fiscal policies and public budgets for expenditure, income, and indebtedness have a feedback to generate fiscal policies that together not only mean few resources for the care systems, but that beyond those few resources, those very few resources are distributed in an unequal manner. And fiscal policy should have as a main objective social reproduction. And that, within social reproduction, we have care. Without social reproduction, there would not be life, but there wouldn't be a GDP either. We wouldn't have economic growth. We wouldn't have the possibility of paying debt. Therefore, it's important that the taxing systems are fair and both capital and the wealthy finance and contribute to financing care, which are part of the social reproduction. But there's not only a connection with social reproduction or an economy. In general, in all of our countries, we base our social contracts in human rights and freedoms. And as care falls on women, there's no opportunities to ensure human rights, the right to an income, the human right to work, the right to a recreational life, the right to be able to choose which kind of employment women want, which is why it is also important for us to think not only in the taxing policy that is fair towards social reproduction, but also the guarantees of human rights that are not possible today because we have also said it, and we've seen it in the case of the Philippines, that a great part of the unpaid labor falls on women, and that prevents women to be able to enjoy their rights. And from the point of view, an instrumental point of view, we can also talk about care having an economic return. They have a return, for example, in the GDP. The care policies allow to increase in several ways the GDP. On the one side, because better care policies create or form kids better, boys and girls. is that in the future are going to be the ones working and producing the GDP, but also better income for women, for example, are going to generate more consumption, and that generates more income for the state. They also allow a formal work of people that are care workers, who are usually women, that generates a contribution to the social security systems in a moment in which, for example, Latin America is aging very fast, and we need to strengthen the retirement systems that are solidary or of distributions, which is why we're saying that the investment, whatever we invest in care, is not an expenditure, but an investment that is going to be having an important return. For me in particular, I have issues with this argument, but it is an argument that convinces the ministries of economy and finances, and that allows to sustain all of this work that we're undertaking of promoting policies and care systems that are financed. But as I was saying, that financing, not only financing, but it needs to be a fair financing so that all of the population, and particularly those that are being benefited of the economic growth, are the ones financing care. It wouldn't be a fair financing if the women themselves are the ones that end up financing the policies that help reduce the unpaid work and the care work. And finally, I wanted to mention how these doesn't happen in a country such as Paraguay, where we have very few care policies, and these are care policies that benefit certain sectors, meaning the maternity leaves, since that's formal work and that's the work that women who receive that education can access, they actually benefit the 40% that is the richest in women. It's not benefiting all women because most women in Paraguay actually work in the informal sector. Then assistance services, they are reaching people more, but coverage is very low. And a policy that has lately been widened and now reaches most children in school is lunch in school. Why do I include lunch in school as a care policy? Because it allows to extend the educational day. And in that way, it allows for women to have more options, less unpaid workload, but also more option of employment. So we also have to discuss, we have to talk about the care policies to be focused on gender. If they're not gender focused, they are not going to have a direct benefit on women. So we are making this debate more complex. And finally, Paraguay has regulations for caretakers, but they are not enforced because female caretakers and home workers are the more vulnerable sectors for informal work. So there we need to realize that. So the time for caring and the licenses, those benefit the people with more money, women with more money and education, and the policies that benefit those with less income or less resources, those have low coverage or are not enforced. So in conclusion, on the side of the care policies, we have that uh, the higher care weight falls on Paraguayan women, and they subsidize economy because they subsidize economic growth, since they are contributing about 17% of a work that is necessary to produce. Without that work that is unpaid, it would be impossible for people to go out and work 50 hours a day as they do in Paraguay. And on the other side, on the financing side, it's an unfair financing because a big part, first, we have a low income or low collection, and it's more of indirect taxing than direct taxing. So the wealthiest people are not paying the taxes that they should, and they're not paying Social Security due to its low coverage. So we have some tax exemptions, even though they're the lower in Latin America. Half of those benefit again capital. Therefore, there's a space to assess and analyze who is being benefited really. And we have high levels of evasion and elusion where we have illicit financial flows embedded. I'm about to wrap up, which are focused in soy transnational companies. So we have on the one side low coverage care policies that are fragmented, and on the other side we have an unfair financing. And this combination makes it so that, of course, we have to make a great effort to change both care policies on the side of the expenditure and the taxing policies on the side of the income. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for drawing for us the nexus between social reproduction and the economy. And I really love what you said when you said that whatever we spend on care is an investment, not an expenditure, and that gender and the care policies that we enforce or implement should be gender focused. Our next speaker from Senegal is Mariam PM, a doctor of public law specializing in public finance and taxation. Her doctoral thesis entitled The Interpretation of Tax Law in Francophone Black African States, the examples of Benin, Mali, and Senegal, laid the academic foundations for her expertise. She is currently a lecturer and a researcher at the Cheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar. Alongside her academic career, she also serves as the senior program officer of the program for supporting public finance performance. Over to you and tell us about Senegal.
Merci. Vous m'entendez?
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. So I'm going to begin. I first of all would like to thank the organizers of this webinar and this panel. I would like to thank you for allowing us to participate in this project. And thank you to Veronica, Lane, and the whole group. So my intervention will be on social protection in Senegal, the disparity between sexes when it comes to financing of care. So my focus will be on women and especially on handicapped. So women who are working in the informal sector in Dakar. So before I start, I would like to come back to the 97% that was shown for Senegal. These were the last figures that were published by the National Agency on Statistics, and which explains the figures that were shown before. I would like also go back to the question that in Senegal, 92% of women are employed in the informal sector, and 94% of these women, therefore, they are the ones who buy and sell. So they are entrepreneurs. They work and contribute to national economy and pay taxes. But when they fall sick, when they grow old, they are excluded from the system because our system in Senegal is tied to formal salaries. So if you are not working in an a company, or if you are not receiving a monthly salary, then it is very difficult for you to have social protection. So there is a system that was put in place with a subscription. So our question from the beginning is simple. How can we have a link between these women who pay taxes and what can they receive as social protection? Because we have women that I was talking about, women in the informal sector, and yet have no certain rights. They're in the market, they are having businesses there, and they work in the groundnuts sector, because that is the first product. There are many women who work there, and in the transformation industry, the manufacturing industry. So it is very clear that these women are paying a lot of taxes. But now we have a system in an equal system in Senegal. We have women who work in this, and we have that in our document, because a lot comes from indirect taxes. And we have the only taxation which is a good part of the national budget favors, for instance, consumption taxation. So we find that this taxation is regressive. The women, the rich women manage to get something, but the poor women are left out, because we find that those who earn more contribute less, and those who earn less contribute more. And then we find also that those who pay the highest, those who earn the highest revenue present a very small percentage. So the consumption at the household level is therefore very low. And then if you go to the market, you find that the women earn just 100 CFA, that is francs per day. And then you find that per month, they only earn 3,000, and yet they pay the tax, which is quite high when it is all added together. So they contribute double. They contribute to indirect taxes, but also through consumption. So we have, we can say, therefore, that apart, while they are contributing so much, what are they offered by the state? From what we have studied, you see that even with a yearly subscription for these women working in the informal sector, they may not have the same advantages and benefits as those who are in formal employment. So the reality is that there is an under financing the needs and the fact that these women have to look at their responsibilities, and yet at the same time they are not able to meet those needs. And then we also find that there is an annual need which is calculated, but where the revenues go towards debt payment. We have the gender dimension, where not everything concerns only the women, but we find that even the expert who was working on this the cases could see, and it came out with the result that the question of gender is not taken into account. You find that the women can pay on their own outside the formal system, and yet men find it easier to register to pay on their own. So that means that women are less advantaged even there. If you look at what is attributed to Senegal, women say we pay taxes, but we don't see where those taxes are going. We collect taxes, so the women are not rejecting the fact that they need to pay, but they are asking, we pay, but we don't see where the taxes go. And then the women also say we are the larger percentage of the working force. And in Senegal, women have 4 to 5 children, and now paying for every child, even if it is just for health, it is already so high because they don't have fixed employment. They earn on a daily basis. So it is very difficult for them to even pay a monthly subscription, for instance. So we find that it would be important to have some membership to an insurance so that women are able to meet those needs, because there's too much domestic work that is not remunerated. There are many diseases that the women end up with. They work so hard, and yet they don't have the health care that they need. These women are, they wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and work. And they have asked us many questions concerning whatever indirect taxes they pay and how they are supposed to manage. In Dakar, for instance, you find that there's no nursery school for children. So that also is a problem for them, because they have to pay someone to take care of their children. So the biggest question is the access to health insurances, and also the care for small children. For poor women, for widows, they don't have access to funding. And some suggestions that were made to us, we know that there are taxes that exist
One more
that
minute.
are attached,
Okay.
taxes that are, I'm going to conclude. So there are three things about Senegal. First of all, there is the policy of social protection, which excludes women, especially when it comes to care for these women. This is not taken into account by the authorities. The second thing is that they contribute, but they don't see what their taxes do. And then there is also the lack of care of small children that would then enable the women to go and work. So we have this question of taxation, and we know that if the taxes are well used, these would help very much. Women are not asking for favors. Women are only asking to understand how their taxes are used. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Women are not asking for favors. They're asking on how their money is being used. Thank you so much for the deep dive in about Senegal. And you can read more about the findings of this case study in the guide.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Just to introduce Clelia Garcia. Sorry if I pronounced her name wrong. She's a tax specialist at Latindad. She works at the intersection of feminist economics and tax justice. Her work focuses on how fiscal system can either reinforce inequality or help redistribute resources to sustain life and care. Through her work on Ecuador case study, the FFT 3, she highlighted the importance of progressive taxation and fiscal space for building resilience public care system. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Clelia. Clelia, your audience.
Thank you so much for the introduction and also for the presentations that preceded me. Also, I think we will be staying for an extra 15 minutes during the presentation, and I'll try and be as concise as possible. Only that I will speak in Spanish, so if you need to change to the interpretation channel, please do so now. No, creo que
I think that a lot of what has already been said is cross-sectional to all of the case studies. I think that going back to the centrality of care and the need to finance what's been mentioned in several cases, I want to go deeper into, well, a particular angle within the case of Ecuador. And that is that here we have a very big gap between what's written in the regulation and what actually is being financed. In Ecuador, care is not absent in the legal frameworks. So there are constitutional provisions that recognize wide rights and principles of protection, state responsibilities in terms of well-being, welfare. And there are strategies and several frameworks that in theory should aim to ensure services connected to care. And so in summary, in paper, the commitment is there, but the issue is that many of these provisions have not been accompanied by secondary regulation that is clear, meaning operational mechanisms of implementation. And particularly in many cases, there are not financing sources that are associated that will allow for these implementations to be stable and universal, or at least enough sufficient in their scope. And this is where fiscal policies become central, because the degraded rights and budgets in practicality are actually very weak and weak promises. So this sort of structural tension that we see in Ecuador reminds us, or actually to go back to certain details of the structural tension that we have, I'm going to take some key data. In several cases, the Ecuadorian system depends of indirect taxes such as the VAT, which means that the houses with less income are having more weight in terms of contributing to this tax collection. And as we saw in the question that was made, the level of evasion of corporate income tax was 65%, which is absurd, since a great part of the profits in corporations is not contributing fully to state financing. And if we also think about the debt pressure that is increasing in a very rapid way, particularly with the safety purposes, taxes are being used for military expenses. And that also decentralizes in social needs, and particularly in terms of care. Within this paradox, the state is continue to assume regulation commitments in terms of care and social protection, but these are commitments that do not have finance structural sources, so they cannot really provide them. This is not a technical detail, but a political contradiction. And financing the state is not just allocating an isolated tax entry, but the whole structure of the state and its finances and financings should prioritize and put in the middle not just the which programs are we going to have and who's benefited, but also where the resources are coming from, who are we collecting from, how much, and how, in order to prevent these issues such as profit shifting, evasion, and so on, that are very important problems in our region and in the global south as a whole, and in the whole world. Here, when care falls on the households, well, we also know that within the households, it falls on women. Because in Ecuador, for example, women also work for 4 times what men work in terms of care. And there's a lot of arguments for promotion of equality right now versus what's actually happening in practice. So in this taxing perspective of feminist tax justice that we are proposing, closing that gap between regulation and reality, it would involve several things, several ideas, such as strengthening progressivity in taxing, progressiveness in taxing, reduce corporate evasion, to review taxing benefits that are regressive and not coherent with national and international commitments that the country has entered into in terms of environment and social protection. And all of this would help protect the taxing space that the state needs to finance social policies. So it's not just about increasing the collection of taxes, but make it more efficient and focus it intentionally in order for it to be progressive and to be enough. It's a reconfiguration of the system so that those that have more capacity to contribute actually contribute more proportionally, which is one of the basic characteristics of taxing. So I would say that a structural reform of this kind is not only necessary right now, but imperative, particularly with the increasing demand of care that we are seeing with the changes in population and age distribution in the population, even the production and consumption dynamics that depend more and more on care. I think that furthermore, as I said before, this gap is not exclusive of Ecuador. And therefore, I want to briefly mention the general conclusions of the document to wrap up this space and give space to the Q&A, which is that in the different analyzed countries, there are dynamics that are repeated, at least in this volume, and there is an increasing recognition of care in the public discourse, at least in discourse. However, the taxing systems have not been transformed in order to sustain that, for them to be sustainable long term as enough in their scope and actually universal. And one of the conclusions, or actually, I think this is the first one of the more central ones in the document, that the fiscal systems currently are not being designed to finance sustainably the social care infrastructure. A second conclusion is that there is no sustainable care policy without a structural taxing reform so that they go alongside each other. Since social rights require public income that is stable, progressive, and enough, sufficient, and they cannot depend indefinitely on the debt or regressive structure as they are right now. And the third one is that regression and evasion are not unavoidable accidents, but they are the result of political decisions that can be changed. And the volume proposes these clear action lines to proceed on that line, which is that states need to strengthen direct and progressive taxing, that we need to combat evasion and illicit financial flows, review and eliminate regressive taxing expenditure, and protect a taxing space, the taxing space from austerity and other measures. And also we want to make a call to incorporate explicitly gender focus on the taxing system. If we recognize care as a right, we need to guarantee its financing as a public obligation. It cannot be one without the other. Since as I was saying, a right without resources, there's no way of making it a reality. And transforming the taxing system is a crucial part of having these rights be effective. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Claria, for wrapping this up very well with a bow and neatly with a bow. Thank you so much for the insight on what people should expect from the Ecuador study, but also from the guide overall. And at this moment, I would like to thank all of you that have joined us and for making time to join us in launching this third guide. I'd also like to thank Nawi for sponsoring this work, the team at Gadre, our interpreters, and the core group. I will now yield the floor to Alex to give us more information on where to find the guide so that we can dig in and enjoy the fruits of the labor of the panelists.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hazel. I hope everyone can hear me well. And thank you to our amazing panelists and the authors of these really incredible case studies. I think Clelia said, like, this system we have now is a political choice, and that means it can be changed. And I think now the call forward is really to take action. And so with that, in the chat, I have shared 3 key links. The first is the Framing Feminist Taxation Guide, which we are now launching, and we're so grateful and happy to be doing that, as well as the campaign toolkit for the rest of these 10th Global Days of Action on Tax Justice for Women's Rights. And we hope that all of you continue to participate, share online, take part in the events, which is the 3rd link, because now we're about halfway through the week of action, and we still have some really incredible events to go. So with that, we really thank all of you for your time and being here today, and we look forward to continuing this very important work all together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. And that is it from us all. Thank you so much for staying until the end. A good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening, and a good night from all of us to you all.